The conference room at Naval Air Station Oceana smelled like burnt coffee and institutional disinfect. Commander Jessica Ravencroft stood at the back wall, arms crossed, watching the brief through narrowed eyes. She'd been summoned from Miramar with zero explanation, just encrypted orders that pulled her off a training rotation mid-cycle. The roomful of SEALs, intelligence analysts, and Pentagon brass hadn't acknowledged her entrance. They were too focused on the tactical display showing satellite imagery of a compound in the Zagros Mountains. She recognized the terrain immediately, had flown over those ridges in another life, when her call sign still meant something to people who mattered. A SEAL team leader near the front, broad-shouldered with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no, glanced back at her. His name tape read KOZLOWSKI. He nudged his teammate and said something too quiet to hear, but the smirk was universal language. Then louder, with the tone of someone making a joke he thought was clever. "Hey, sweetheart, you lost. Admin offices are in Building 7. The room didn't exactly freeze, but several heads turned. An intelligence officer, a woman with captain's bars, shot Kozlowski a warning look. Jessica didn't move. She'd heard worse. Had been hearing worse since her first day at Annapolis when an upperclassman asked if she was there to marry a pilot or become one. She'd learned that silence could be its own kind of answer, the type that made men uncomfortable when they realized you weren't going to play the game they'd set up. "Actually," said a voice from the front of the room, "Commander Ravencroft is exactly where she needs to be." Rear Admiral Chen Wei stood beside the projection screen, his expression unreadable. He was holding a tablet and he tapped it twice. The tactical display changed. Now it showed something else, a series of aerial reconnaissance photos, each stamped with classification markers that made Kozlowski's smirk evaporate. "The files you're about to see are compartmented above your clearance level, Lieutenant. They require biometric authentication from someone with Black Operations access." Chen looked directly at Jessica. "Commander, if you would, S." She pushed off the wall and walked forward. Every step was measured, unhurried. The room had gone silent in the way that only happens when people realize they've fundamentally misread a situation. Jessica reached the terminal at the front of the room and pressed her thumb to the scanner. The system blinked green, then red, then gold, a color combination that made the intelligence officer's eyes widen. 3 separate authentication protocols, each one buried deeper than the last. The screen unlocked. What appeared made 2 of the analysts actually stand up from their chairs. Kozlowski's face had gone pale. Jessica turned to face the room. "My call sign is Phantom," she said quietly, "and I've been to this compound before." The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats before Admiral Chen took control of the room again. "Commander Ravencroft flew 12 missions over Iranian airspace between 2019 and 2021, he said, his voice carrying the weight of classified truth. "Missions that don't exist in any official record. She was part of a joint task force operating under presidential finding authorization, the kind that gets burned if anyone asks questions." Jessica watched the faces around the table recalibrate. Kozlowski was staring at his notepad now, jaw tight. The intelligence officer, her name tape read MORRISON, was studying Jessica with new interest, the kind that came from recognizing a peer instead of an outsider. A Marine colonel near the window had his arms crossed, but his expression had shifted from skeptical to calculating. "The compound you're looking at," Jessica said, stepping closer to the display, "is owned by a front company called Ardashir Logistics. On paper, they move construction equipment. In reality, they broker arms deals for IRGC Quds Force operatives throughout the region." She used a laser pointer to highlight a building on the northwest corner. "This structure has a basement that extends 40 feet underground. The entrance is here, concealed under what looks like a generator housing." Morrison leaned forward. "How do you know the depth?" "Because I put a surveillance team on the roof of the adjacent building for 72 hours in February 2020, Jessica said. "We used ground-penetrating radar disguised as utility maintenance equipment. The Iranian security services never noticed because We ran the operation during their presidential election cycle. Everyone was focused on Tehran. Chen pulled up another image, this one showing a grainy photograph of a man in his 50s, gray beard, sharp eyes. Brigadier General Karim Shahrauti, IRGC Aerospace Commander. We have intelligence suggesting he's moved a high-value package into that compound within the last 72 hours. The package is believed to be technical documentation related to their ballistic missile program, specifically, guidance system algorithms that could significantly increase their strike accuracy. "Let me guess," said the Marine colonel, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over Rodorwash. "We can't just level the building." "Correct," Chen said. "The compound is located in a civilian neighborhood. Collateral damage would be significant and politically unacceptable. We need a surgical extraction. Get in, secure the documentation, and get out without leaving evidence of American involvement." Jessica knew where this was going. She'd known the moment she saw the orders. You need someone who can fly low-altitude penetration in hostile airspace without getting painted by their air defense network. "We need someone who's already done it," Chen corrected. He gestured to the display. "Your previous missions established flight corridors through their radar coverage. You know where the gaps are." Kozlowski finally spoke, his voice stripped of its earlier bravado. "Commander, those corridors, are they still viable?" Jessica met his eyes. There was no satisfaction in watching his arrogance dissolve, just a tired recognition of how many times she'd had to prove herself to rooms full of men who assumed she was a diversity hire or someone's assistant. "The Iranians rotate their radar frequencies every 18 months, she said. "But the terrain doesn't change. The mountains create natural blind spots that no amount of technology can eliminate. If you know where to fly, you can stay invisible." "If you know where to fly," Morrison repeated. "How many pilots have that knowledge?" "Currently," Jessica's smile was thin, "one." The briefing continued for another 90 minutes. Jessica walked them through the tactical approach, how her previous missions had mapped not just radar gaps, but also Iranian response times, patrol patterns, and communication protocols. She'd flown an extensively modified FA-18E Super Hornet, stripped of everything unnecessary, loaded with electronic warfare suites that could spoof enemy sensors into seeing ghosts while the real aircraft slipped through undetected. "The Iranians call it the Shaitan aircraft," she explained, using the Farsi word for devil. "Their pilots reported contacts that appeared and disappeared, radar signatures that didn't match any known platform. They wrote reports. Their commanders dismissed them as equipment malfunctions or pilot error." She pulled up a translated Iranian Air Defense Force memo that had been intercepted by NSA. "This document, from March 2021, recommends psychological evaluation for any pilot who reports anomalous contacts in the Zagros region." The Marine colonel actually laughed, a short, sharp bark. "You gaslit an entire air defense network." "We made them doubt their own systems," Jessica corrected. "Which is more valuable than destroying them? A destroyed radar gets replaced. A radar network that can't trust its own data becomes paralyzed by second-guessing." Chen pulled up a mission timeline. "The operation window is tight. Shahrauti is scheduled to leave the compound in 96 hours. We need to hit them before he moves, but after their security rotation shift at 0300 local time. That gives us a 4-hour window." "Not enough time for a traditional SEAL insertion," Kozlowski said, and Jessica noticed he was speaking to her now, not around her. "Infill would take too long, and exfil under contact would compromise the whole operation." "That's why this isn't a ground operation," Jessica said. She changed the display to show an aerial approach vector. "We go in by air, fast, low, and quiet. Combat search and rescue protocols, but in reverse. Instead of extracting personnel, we're extracting documents." "You're talking about landing in a hostile urban environment," Morrison said. "In the dark, in a country where getting captured means a show trial and execution." Jessica nodded, Yes. And you'd be flying the aircraft. Yes. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Why you? No disrespect, Commander, but this sounds like a job for a full tactical team. It was Admiral Chen who answered. Because Commander Ravencroft isn't just a pilot. Before her Black Operations assignment, she spent 3 years with the 24th Special Tactics Squadron. She's combat rescue qualified, speaks functional Farsi, and has more hours flying low-altitude penetration missions in denied airspace than any active pilot in the United States military. He paused. And because when her previous missions went wrong, and they did go wrong, she brought her aircraft home every single time. Jessica saw something shift in Morrison's expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. How many times did things go wrong? Twice, Jessica said. She touched her left shoulder unconsciously, where a scar from shrapnel ran 6 inches down toward her collarbone. Once we took ground fire from a position we didn't know existed, lost hydraulics and flew 200 miles on backup systems. The second time, an Iranian fighter got lucky, spotted us on visual during a patrol we hadn't anticipated. We went defensive, burned most of our fuel evading, and landed at a forward classified site running on fumes and prayers. But you made it back, Kozlowski said. I made it back, Jessica confirmed, and so did my crew. The meeting broke into smaller discussions after that. Admiral Chen pulled Jessica aside near the coffee station, his expression concerned. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Your obligation to that program ended when they shut it down. You've done more than enough. Jessica poured herself a cup of the burnt coffee, more for something to do with her hands than because she wanted it. Sir, with respect, if I don't fly this mission, who will? You said it yourself. I'm the only pilot with current knowledge of those flight corridors. We could update the intelligence, send a different crew. In 96 hours, Jessica shook her head. It took me 6 months to map those routes, sir. 6 months of flying patterns that looked like training exercises, of testing their response times, of learning how their radar operators think. You don't download that kind of knowledge from a satellite image. Chen was quiet for a moment. Your father would be proud, he said finally. Jessica felt something tighten in her chest. Vice Admiral Thomas Ravencroft had died in a training accident when she was 17, an accident that investigation later revealed was caused by faulty maintenance records someone had falsified to cover budget shortfalls. She joined the Navy 6 months later, driven by a complicated mixture of grief, anger, and the need to prove that his legacy meant something. My father, she said slowly, would tell me that some missions matter more than the people who fly them. And your mother. That made Jessica smile, though there was sadness in it. Mom would tell me to come home safe, then spend the entire deployment organizing care packages and writing letters to Congress about equipment funding. Her mother, Dr. Sarah Ravencroft, had channeled her grief into advocacy, working to improve safety standards, pushing for better oversight, making sure other families didn't lose someone the way she had. She knows what I do. She's never asked me to stop. She's asked you to be careful, though. Every single time. Jessica took a sip of the terrible coffee. Sir, I need to ask, if this goes wrong, what's the extraction protocol? Chen's expression hardened. If you're compromised over Iranian territory, we disavow knowledge. You become a rogue pilot who stole an aircraft for reasons we're still investigating. Your service record gets sealed, your black ops clearances get burned, and you disappear into the federal prison system while we work diplomatic channels quietly in the background. And if I don't make it out at all, then your family gets a folded flag and a story about a training accident. Chen met her eyes. That's the deal, Commander. Same as it's always been for people who do what you do. Jessica nodded slowly. She'd known the terms when she'd first signed on to the Black Operations Program, had known them when she'd volunteered for the 24th Special Tactics Squadron. The military had a way of asking for everything while promising nothing except the knowledge that the work mattered. When do we start mission planning? Tomorrow morning, 0600. We've got a secure facility at Little Creek where the tactical team is staging. Chen paused. Kozlowski will be leading the ground element. I know he made a poor first impression, but he's good at his job. Give him a chance. I always do, sir, Jessica said. Everyone gets one chance. What they do with it determines how I treat them afterward. Jessica spent that night in the bachelor officers' quarters at Oceana, lying awake and staring at the ceiling. Sleep had been elusive since the program ended, since she'd come back from that final mission with her aircraft held together by emergency repairs, and the knowledge that 3 similar operations had been scrubbed permanently due to congressional oversight concerns. The politicians had decided that the risk of exposure outweighed the intelligence value. They'd shuttered the program, dispersed the pilots, and classified everything under so many layers of secrecy that it might as well have never existed. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother: heard you're back east. Coffee before you deploy again. Jessica smiled. Her mother had an uncanny ability to sense when something was happening, even though Jessica had never once told her about the classified missions. She typed back, "Rain check. I'll call you when I can." The response came immediately. "Be safe, sweetheart. Your father's watching over you." Jessica set the phone aside and closed her eyes. She could see the mountains in her mind, the Zagros Range, stark and beautiful in the dawn light, terrain that had been crossed by armies and traders for thousands of years. Somewhere in those mountains, in a basement 40 feet underground, documents sat in a safe that could shift the balance of power in the Middle East. And in 96 hours, she'd be flying into that space again, threading through radar coverage like a needle through cloth, betting her life on knowledge that was 2 years old and might already be obsolete. The old fear was there, the kind that lived in every combat pilot's chest, not fear of dying exactly, but fear of failure, fear of letting down the people who depended on you, fear of making a mistake that got someone else killed. She'd learned to live with that fear, to use it as a tool that kept her sharp and focused, but it never went away completely. It just waited in the dark spaces, reminding her that competence was never enough to guarantee survival. At 0200, she gave up on sleep and went to the base gym. The weight room was empty, just her and the equipment and the mirrors that reflected a woman who looked younger than her 34 years. She went through her routine methodically: bench press, squats, deadlifts, the kind of functional strength work that had saved her life more than once when she'd had to haul herself out of a crashed aircraft or carry equipment across hostile terrain. The physical exertion helped quiet the noise in her head, let her focus on the simple mechanics of muscle and motion. She was finishing her cool-down stretches when someone else entered the gym. Kozlowski, wearing PT gear and looking surprised to see her. They regarded each other for a moment, and Jessica waited to see what kind of man he'd choose to be. "Commander," he said finally, "I owe you an apology." Jessica straightened. "You owe me competent performance in the field. The rest is just noise." "Still, what I said yesterday was unprofessional." She studied him. He looked uncomfortable but sincere, and she recognized the body language of someone who'd been dressed down by a superior officer and told to fix it. "Lieutenant, we both know how this works. I've been underestimated my entire career, sometimes by people who should know better, usually by people who assume that because I'm a woman I must be less capable." She picked up her water bottle. "What matters is whether you can follow orders when the mission starts. Can you?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then we're good." Jessica headed toward the door, then paused. "One piece of advice, Lieutenant. The next time you're in a briefing room and you see someone you don't recognize, maybe assume they're supposed to be there. You'll look less foolish when it turns out they outrank you." She left him standing there, and she didn't look back. The secure facility at Little Creek was a nondescript building behind multiple fences and guard stations. Jessica arrived at 0545, and was immediately escorted to a conference room that had been converted into a mission planning cell. Maps covered every wall, satellite imagery lay scattered across tables, and a scale model of the Iranian compound occupied the center of the room like a miniature city. The team was already assembled, Kozlowski and 5 other SEALs, all wearing unmarked fatigues, Morrison from Naval Intelligence, a CIA officer who introduced himself only as Davis and said nothing else, a weather officer named Lieutenant Pack who looked barely old enough to drink, and Admiral Chen, presiding over everything with the calm authority of someone who'd planned more operations than Jessica had flown missions. "All right," Chen said once everyone was seated. "Let's walk through this step by step. Commander Ravencroft, the floor is yours." Jessica moved to the model. She'd spent 3 hours last night reviewing the intelligence updates, comparing current satellite imagery with her mission logs from 2 years ago. "The approach vector has 3 critical phases," she began. "Phase 1 is penetration, getting through Iranian border radar coverage without triggering their air defense network. We'll launch from the USS Lincoln, currently operating in the North Arabian Gulf. The flight path takes us across the border at this point." She indicated a spot on the map, where 2 radar facilities have overlapping coverage with a 7-minute gap during shift changes. 7 minutes, one of the SEALs asked. His name tape read CHEN, no relation to the Admiral, Jessica assumed. "That's a tight window." "It's the widest window we've got," Jessica said. "And it's only viable because their commanders don't believe anyone would be crazy enough to exploit it. The terrain approach is steep. The flight path requires visual navigation in the dark, and if you're 30 seconds late, you get painted by both facilities simultaneously." "But you've done it before," Morrison said. "Twice, both times successfully." Jessica traced the route with her finger. "Once we're through the border coverage, Phase 2 begins, low-altitude penetration through the Zagros Range. This is where terrain masking becomes critical. The Iranian radar network is optimized for high-altitude threats, bombers, cruise missiles, that sort of thing. They have blind spots close to the ground, especially in mountainous terrain where the radar returns get cluttered with ground clutter." Lieutenant Pack spoke up. "What about weather? The forecast shows possible storms moving through that region." "That could work in our favor," Jessica said. "Cloud cover gives us additional concealment, and the Iranians tend to relax their alert status during bad weather. They assume no one would fly in it." She pulled up a weather model on one of the displays. "But it also increases risk. Low-altitude flight in mountainous terrain during a storm is about as dangerous as flying gets. We'd be navigating on instruments while staying below radar coverage, which means maintaining altitude discipline while dealing with turbulence and low visibility." "Your call, Commander," Chen said. "Do we wait for better weather or accept the risk?" Jessica studied the forecast models. In her mind, she was already flying the route, feeling how the aircraft would handle in those conditions. "We accept the risk," she said finally. "The weather gives us more tactical advantage than it costs us in safety margin, and the window is closing. If we wait for perfect conditions, Shahrauti leaves and we lose our chance." They spent the next 4 hours drilling down into every detail. The aircraft she'd be flying was an extensively modified MH-60M Black Hawk, configured for special operations with upgraded engines, additional fuel tanks, and electronic warfare systems that could jam or spoof Iranian radar. Not as fast as the Super Hornet she'd flown on previous missions, but more versatile for the urban landing she'd need to execute. "The compound has a courtyard here," Jessica explained, pointing to the model. "Approximately 40 meters by 30 meters, tight for a helicopter landing, but doable if the approach is precise. The buildings create a wind tunnel effect that will need to account for downdrafts and crosswinds that'll try to push us into the walls." Kozlowski leaned closer. "What about security response time?" "Estimated at 90 seconds from touchdown to initial contact," Morrison said, pulling up intelligence assessments. The compound has a dedicated security force, 12 to 15 personnel, armed with AK pattern rifles and possibly RPGs. Once they realize what's happening, they'll converge on the courtyard. Which means we need to be on the ground for no more than 60 seconds, Kozlowski said. He looked at his team. Chen, Rodriguez, your fast rope security. Establish a perimeter the moment we touch down. Morgan, Williams, you're with me on the building entry. Lieutenant Carson here. He indicated a lean SEAL who'd been studying the model intently, is our technical specialist. He secures the documents while we hold the building. Carson spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a soft Tennessee drawl. What kind of safe are we talking about? Unknown, Davis, the CIA officer said. Intelligence suggests something high-end, probably electronic lock with biometric backup. Can you crack it? Depends on the model. If it's Iranian manufacture, probably. If it's Chinese or Russian, maybe. If it's Israeli or American, Carson shrugged. We might have a problem. Plan for the worst case, Chen said. If you can't crack it in 30 seconds, we blow it. Morgan, you're carrying the breaching charges. A muscular SEAL nodded. Shaped charges, minimal collateral damage. I can pop that safe in 3 seconds if needed. Last resort only, Jessica interjected. The mission depends on stealth. If we start blowing things up, every Iranian security force within 10 kilometers comes running. Agreed, Kozlowski said. We go quiet, stay quiet, and extract before anyone realizes we were there. He traced the route from the courtyard to the basement entrance. This is where it gets complicated. We're going underground into a structure we don't have current blueprints for, looking for a safe we can't precisely locate, while on a 60-second timer. 50 seconds, Jessica corrected. You need 10 seconds to get back to the courtyard for extraction. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed that timeline. 50 seconds to move through an unknown building, locate and crack a safe, secure documents, and return to the landing zone. It was the kind of operation that required perfect execution and a little bit of luck. All right, Chen said. Let's talk contingencies. Commander, what happens if you can't maintain position in the courtyard, whether mechanical failure, whatever? Jessica had already thought through those scenarios. If I have to wave off the landing, the ground team aborts and we extract to the primary alternate landing zone, here, 3 kilometers west. It's a clearing that'll give us space to regroup. If the aircraft is damaged or disabled during the landing, I shut down and the team expands the perimeter while we work repair or await secondary extraction. And if you take fire during the approach? Depends on the fire. Small arms we press through, the Black Hawk can handle that. Heavy weapons or guided missiles, we abort and exfil at max speed. The electronic warfare suite should give us warning if they're locking us up with radar. Morrison pulled up another display. This is the Iranian fighter coverage for that region. They have F-14s at Tabriz, about 200 kilometers north, and F-4s at Isfahan, about 300 kilometers south. Response time if they scramble is 12 to 15 minutes. Which means we need to be wheels up and headed for the border before they even launch, Jessica said. Once we're back in the mountains, terrain masking keeps us invisible again. But if they catch us in open airspace? She didn't need to finish that thought. Everyone in the room knew what happened when a helicopter met a fighter jet. Admiral Chen called for a 30-minute break. Jessica stepped outside into the Virginia humidity, feeling the weight of the mission settling onto her shoulders. This was different from her previous operations. Those had been reconnaissance flights, gathering intelligence without direct engagement. This was a combat mission, with American boots on Iranian soil and all the political implications that came with it. Lieutenant Pack joined her near a picnic table under a tree. Commander, can I ask you something? Go ahead. How do you handle the pressure, knowing that everything depends on you flying that aircraft perfectly? Jessica studied the younger officer. She remembered being that age, freshly minted and convinced that asking questions meant showing weakness. You want the honest answer or the one that sounds good in official statements. Honest, please. I don't handle it, Jessica said. I compartmentalize it. When I'm planning, I let myself feel the full weight of responsibility. That keeps me sharp, makes sure I don't overlook details. But when I'm flying, all that goes away. There's no room for existential dread when you're navigating a mountain pass at 200 feet. You fall back on training, trust your instruments, and execute the mission one decision at a time. What if you make a mistake? Then I adapt. Every flight has moments where something goes wrong, equipment malfunctions, weather changes, intelligence turns out to be inaccurate. The difference between pilots who survive and pilots who don't is how quickly you recognize the problem and adjust. Jessica paused. You're doing the weather forecast for this mission, right? Yes, ma'am. Then let me give you some advice. Don't give me the forecast you think I want to hear. Give me the truth, even if it's bad news. I can plan around difficult weather. I can't plan around surprises. Pack nodded slowly. The extended models show a 30% chance of severe turbulence in the target area. I was worried about mentioning it because I didn't want to seem like I was trying to scrub the mission. 30%, which models? Both the GFS and Euro models show similar probability. Wind shear between 3 and 8,000 feet, possibly severe. Jessica processed that. Wind shear in mountainous terrain was dangerous, the kind of thing that could slam an aircraft into a cliff face before the pilots even realized what was happening. Include that in your brief when we reconvene, she said. Admiral Chen needs to know, and so does the team. We'll factor it into our risk assessment. Yes, ma'am, Pack hesitated. Commander, why do you do this? Missions like these, I mean. You could have a comfortable staff position somewhere, maybe teach at a training command. I could, Jessica agreed. But then who would fly these missions? Someone less experienced. Someone who doesn't know the terrain. She shook her head. You don't volunteer for special operations because you want comfort, Lieutenant. You do it because you have skills that are rare enough to matter, and because walking away means people die who didn't have to. That's a heavy burden. Yes, Jessica said simply, it is. When they reconvened, Pack delivered his weather update professionally, laying out the turbulence risk without editorial comment. Admiral Chen absorbed the information, then looked at Jessica. Does this change your assessment, Commander? It increases the risk, but it doesn't make the mission impossible, Jessica said. I've flown in worse conditions. The key is respecting the danger without being paralyzed by it. We'll need to adjust our approach vector to minimize time in the shear layer, and I'll want the electronic warfare officer monitoring wind conditions continuously during the flight. Who's your EWO for this mission? Kozlowski asked. Haven't been assigned one yet, Jessica said. She looked at Chen. Sir, I'll need someone with experience in hostile airspace operations, someone who can handle both the electronic warfare suite and serve as co-pilot if needed. Chen consulted his tablet. I'm assigning Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb. He flew with you on 2 of your previous operations in 2020. That work for you? Jessica felt relief wash over her. Webb was good, calm under pressure, technically proficient, and one of the few people who'd never treated her differently because of her gender. That works perfectly, sir. He's inbound from Norfolk, should be here within the hour. Chen turned to the wider group. Let's talk exfiltration. Once the team is back aboard the helicopter and you're airborne, what's the plan? Jessica pulled up the map again. We reverse the approach route back through the mountains, terrain masking the whole way, until we reach the border. The timing is critical here. We need to hit the radar gap on the way out, which means our ground operation timeline determines everything else. If we're delayed by even 5 minutes, the shift change window closes, and we have to take an alternate route that adds 20 minutes to the flight. Which puts us in range of the Iranian fighters, Morrison said. Correct, And at that point, our survival depends on whether the Navy can provide fighter support without triggering a diplomatic incident. Jessica looked at Chen. What's the air cover situation, sir? We'll have F-35s orbiting over Iraqi airspace, call sign Viper flight. They can cross the border if needed, but only as a last resort. The political fallout of American fighters engaging Iranian aircraft over Iranian territory would be significant. So we're on our own, unless everything goes completely wrong. That's the reality of this type of operation, Commander. You know that. Jessica did know it, had always known it. The Black Operations Program had been built on plausible deniability, American personnel operating in hostile territory with minimal support and maximum risk, doing jobs that couldn't be acknowledged even if they succeeded. Understood, sir. Then we make sure we hit that extraction window. No delays, no complications. Kozlowski spoke up. Commander, I need to be honest with you. 50 seconds is barely enough time for this operation under ideal conditions. If we encounter any resistance, if the safe takes longer to crack, if we have to search for the documents, then you make decisions in real time and get back to the aircraft as fast as possible, Jessica said. I can hold position in that courtyard for up to 90 seconds if absolutely necessary, but beyond that, the noise alone will bring every security guard in the compound. You'll be fighting your way out instead of sneaking. Can you provide covering fire if needed? Jessica shook her head. The Black Hawk has door guns, but using them defeats the entire purpose of the mission. The moment we start shooting, this stops being a covert intelligence gathering operation and becomes an act of war. Lieutenant Commander Webb arrived at 0900, carrying a coffee cup and wearing the relaxed confidence of someone who'd done this job long enough to know his own capabilities. He was 41, with graying temples and laugh lines around his eyes, a man who'd seen enough combat to take it seriously, but not so much that it had broken him. He and Jessica had flown together through some of the worst conditions she could remember, and she'd never once doubted his judgment. Phantom, he said, using her call sign. Should have known they'd drag you back for something crazy. Kodiak, she responded, using his, still crashing helicopters into things. Only on purpose, he grinned. Heard we're flying into Iran again, must be a slow week. The banter was deliberate, the kind of casual humor that diffused tension and reminded everyone that they were professionals who'd done this before. Jessica walked him through the mission parameters, while the SEAL team conducted their own planning session on the other side of the room. Wind shear in the mountains, Webb said, studying the weather data. That's going to make the low-altitude flight interesting. Interesting is one word for it. And we're landing in a courtyard that's barely bigger than our rotor diameter in the dark, possibly during a storm, in a hostile urban environment with enemy security forces seconds away. Webb looked up from the data, just like old times. Better than flying a desk. Debatable, but he was smiling. All right, let's walk through the electronic warfare profile. You're worried about their radar network, but what about communications? If they get a radio call out to their military command, we're going to have company. That's where you come in, Jessica said. The moment we cross the border, you start jamming their military frequencies. Nothing aggressive, we don't want to advertise our presence, but enough to create dead zones in their communication network. If anyone tries to radio for help, their call doesn't get through. Which gives us what? Maybe 5 minutes before they realize something's wrong. That's the estimate. Long enough for us to complete the operation and be gone before they can organize a response. Webb nodded slowly. What's our abort criteria? At what point do we decide the mission is compromised and get the hell out? It was a good question, the kind that separated experienced operators from cowboys who thought they were invincible. If we're detected on approach, if their fighters scramble or their air defense sites go active, we abort immediately and return to the carrier. If we make it to the compound but the situation on the ground is wrong, more security than expected. The building layout doesn't match intelligence, whatever. We make a judgment call. But if we're taking fire during extraction, we suppress and evade. No heroic last stands. Glad we're on the same page. Webb consulted his notes. What about mechanical issues? The Black Hawk is reliable, but we're pushing it to its limits with this mission profile. I'll be conducting a full pre-flight inspection before we launch. If anything looks even slightly questionable, we don't go. And during the flight, you're monitoring every system constantly. The moment something starts degrading, you tell me. Even if it means missing the window. Especially if it means missing the window. A living pilot with a functional aircraft is worth more than a dead hero. Webb studied her for a moment. You've changed since 2021, more cautious. I've learned that bravery and stupidity look identical until after the mission's over, Jessica said. And I've seen too many good people die because they confused the two. The final briefing took place at 1400 hours. Everyone assembled again, but this time the atmosphere was different, focused, professional, stripped of any casual uncertainty. This was the moment where theory became commitment, where everyone had to decide whether they were truly willing to risk everything for a mission that might not work. Admiral Chen stood at the head of the table. This operation has been designated Scorpion Shadow. Authorization comes from the highest levels of government with special presidential finding. What we're about to do is technically an act of war, which means if anyone is captured, there will be no rescue attempt. You will be disavowed, your records will be sealed, and you will disappear into the Iranian prison system. He let that sink in. Anyone who wants to withdraw can do so now. No questions asked, and no impact on your career. The room was silent. Jessica watched the faces around her, saw the same calculation she'd made herself, the weight of duty against the risk of catastrophe, but no one moved, no one spoke. All right then, Chen said. Launch is set for 0100 tomorrow. That puts us over the target at 0315 local time, right in the middle of the Iranian security shift change. Commander Ravencroft, your aircraft will be staged on the Lincoln's deck starting at 2200 tonight. Lieutenant Commander Webb, you'll conduct final systems checks at 2300. SEAL Team, you stage aboard the helicopter at 0045. Kozlowski raised his hand. Rules of engagement, sir. Weapons tight unless fired upon. If you have to shoot, aim to wound, not kill. We want to minimize casualties that could escalate this into a broader conflict. Chen's expression was grim. But if it comes down to protecting American lives or avoiding diplomatic incident, you protect our people. Clear. Clear, sir. Jessica felt the mission coalescing into something real. In 11 hours, she'd be sitting in a helicopter cockpit, running through pre-flight checks while knowing that the next 12 hours would determine whether she lived or died, whether the mission succeeded or failed, whether the intelligence they gathered would prevent a war or start one. The weight of that responsibility was immense, but it was also familiar. She'd carried it before, and she'd carry it again. The meeting broke up into individual prep sessions. Jessica went to her quarters and tried to rest, but sleep remained elusive. Instead, she lay on her bunk and ran through the mission in her mind, visualizing every turn, every altitude change, every decision point. She'd learned years ago that mental rehearsal was almost as valuable as actual flight time, building neural pathways that would let her react instinctively when things went wrong. At 1800 hours, she ate a light dinner in the officers' mess. The food was standard military fare, but she barely tasted it. Her mind was already in the cockpit, already flying the route through hostile airspace. At 2000 hours, she went to the base chapel. Jessica wasn't particularly religious, but she developed a routine over the years, a moment of quiet reflection before missions, a way to acknowledge the possibility of death without being consumed by it. She sat in an empty pew and thought about her father, about the choices that had led her to this moment, about whether she was honoring his memory or just trying to fill a void that could never be filled. "Commander," A voice from the doorway. Kozlowski, looking uncomfortable in the sacred space. "Come in, Lieutenant." He approached carefully, sat down one pew away. "I wanted to thank you for giving me a second chance after how I acted." "Everyone makes mistakes," Jessica said. "What matters is whether you learn from them." "I have, and I want you to know I trust you. My team trusts you. We're going into the worst kind of situation, and knowing you're flying that aircraft makes us believe we'll make it out." Jessica felt something shift in her chest. Respect earned was worth more than respect given. "Then don't make me regret it. Get in, get the documents, get out. Fast and clean." "Fast and clean," Kozlowski agreed. He stood to leave, then paused. "Your call sign Phantom, how'd you get it?" "That's a story for after the mission," Jessica said. "If we all make it back, I'll tell you over drinks." "Deal." After he left, Jessica sat alone in the chapel for another 20 minutes. Then she stood, squared her shoulders, and walked out into the Virginia night. Somewhere across the world, in mountains she knew better than she'd ever wanted to, an enemy compound waited. And in 11 hours, she'd be threading through Iranian airspace like a ghost, betting everything on skill, knowledge, and the thin hope that luck would hold one more time. The mission clock had started. There was no turning back now.